Hello and welcome to Sceptic. I'm Kelsey De Almeida, stand-up comedian, Christian, and now podcaster. In this show, we'll be discussing all the interesting and sometimes slightly weird things people believe in, from religion and vegan diets to asking the big questions like, can we really contact the dead? Join me where in each episode I'll be chatting to an expert or a funny guest discussing a belief that's close to their heart. So, let's introduce today's guest. Welcome to part 2 of my conversation with astrologer Luke Belke. If you enjoyed part 1, then you're going to love this episode because we definitely take it up a notch. In this episode, we talk about Luke's conspiracy theories, the different star signs, how planets can affect our lives, and I get a star chart reading of my own. I want to quickly mention, if you're enjoying these shows, please support me by becoming a Patreon member of mine. For a small monthly donation, you can get extras that others don't get. Head over to patreon.com/antiskeptic to find out more about how that works. Thanks. So let's jump straight into part 2 of my conversation with Luke Belke. You don't sort of strike me as someone who's an astrologer, if that makes sense. I mean this in the best possible way, because if someone said to me prior to this interview, imagine an astrologer, I'd think sort of nerdy, skinny, doesn't leave the house, talks to plants, that sort of thing. But you have tattoos, you skateboard, you look cool, you go to the gym. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I've never met someone who reads horoscopes that could also beat the shit out of me. Ironically, one punch from you and I will be seeing stars. How did you first get into it? Because you do seem like a super chill guy that wouldn't look up to the stars and go and be spiritual. And I know that's sort of a stereotype, but what was it that first drew you to this as a career, basically?
Well, just before I get there, I'll let you know that for 20 years I was a pest controller.
Oh, really?
Yeah, man. I killed rats and cockroaches and termites. I had a successful business on the Gold Coast doing termite management, very successful. And that's what I did, man. I wasn't a spiritual person. I drank a lot of beer and watched football and surfed a lot, and I wasn't spiritual at all. But through that year of no alcohol, I basically lived, up until my awakening, I'd lived a life where I was trying to do what you're supposed to do, like, to be happy. In other words, like, you've got to have a lot of money to be happy. Oh, you've got to have a mortgage to be happy. Oh, you've got to be married to be happy. You've got to have family. Oh, you've got to have overseas holidays. You've got to have a nice car. Tick, 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 getting all those material acquisitions. But internally, something just was missing. I was devoid. I wasn't happy at a deeper level. And to mask that unhappiness, because I wasn't aware of it, I would drink a lot, which led to a very destructive lifestyle, which I snapped myself out, decided to do the year of alcohol. And it was through that year that I was just in a real ferocious had a ferocious desire to want to know, like, I just wanted to look into things, and one thing led to the next thing, and just that question of why would they do that? Like, what's the purpose of that? Like you were saying before, what's their motivation, like, for doing this? And the more deeper I got into the occult. So I started looking at people online talking about ceremonial magic and all sorts of like witchcraft and Wiccan and all of that stuff, like just looking at everything. Found a particular guy online. Actually, it was an Australian guy, Santos Bonacci, he's in the truth movement. If you're in the truth movement, in other words, and I don't like conspiracy, because I think the conspiracy is the narrative that they're pushing on us. That's the conspiracy. So when people say, oh, it's a conspiracy theory, no. When you turn on the news at night, you're getting their conspiracy, their version of your reality. And they're telling you how it is, and you've got to believe it and go along with it and not question it. And if you do, they call you a conspiracy theorist. And it's like, no, that's upside down land. But anyway, in the truth movement, he's very well respected and well known. And there's not anyone that's serious into truth that doesn't know this particular guy. And he was the guy talking about astrotheology. And that topic alone just blew my mind, as far as like, so we're in the age of Pisces, and the ruling planet of Pisces is Jupiter. Okay, and the Roman name for Jupiter is Jupiter, and the Greek name for Jupiter is Zeus. And when you combine Jupiter and Zeus, you get Jesus. And Jesus, right, the god of Pisces, or the ruler of Pisces, is Jesus, the guy that we get in the age of Pisces. Okay, and if you look at the, you have the 12 disciples of Christ, right, the 12 signs of the zodiac. Like there is, and he breaks it down from that perspective, and not just Christianity, but also he looks at all the different religions and how. Did you know that in the age of Gemini, so in other words, we go through these ages, right? We're at the end of the age of Pisces now, moving into the age of Aquarius, and we retrograde backwards through the zodiac in these astrological ages, and we have what they call a great year, which is 25,000 years where we go right through the entire zodiac. And then we have these ages, which are broken down into like roughly 2,500 year periods of time, which represent the equinox rising in the equinox of each zodiac sign, right? We progress through them. But if we go back in time to the age of Gemini, the ruling planet of Gemini is Mercury. But in that age, do you know what Mercury was called?
I don't.
The name for Mercury was Buddha. You know, like we're in the age of Pisces and the ruling planet is Jupiter, also known as Jupiter Zeus, Jesus, right? And it's like this guy was just breaking this down, and he has like hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of free videos on YouTube of talking about this stuff. And it was just blowing my mind. Like I was like, what the hell? Like how you know, and you come to this for the first time. And I was clear of alcohol. Yeah, I was smoking some weed, but that's a different thing. That helps you awaken your consciousness, especially when you're doing it in a controlled sort of way, not just like let's get high. But if you for me it's like you can smoke a little bit of weed and then read a book or look into something, and you get, for me anyway, you get the archetypal patterns that are behind these things, the understanding and the meaning that whoever's presented it is trying to convey, and it's deep and it's profound and it's like unavoidable. So that led me to like, okay, there's something to astrology. I don't know what it is, but I want to look into it. So then I went online and I started looking deeper into it. I found places online where you can cast your own birth chart. I did that. I got the basic generic interpretations off the online free, calculator thing. And I sat with it for a month reading it and was just blown away. Now, at the time I was doing that, my ex-wife was studying psychology through a university, and she was coming to profound insights into the human psyche using psychology. And I'm having similar profound insights into the psychology of people and the makeup and the characteristics and the consciousness, looking at it just from an astrological perspective. And she was saying, like, how the fuck is that even possible? I'm like, I don't know, but that's just how you interpret it. It's like, wow. So it blew my mind. And that inspired me to say, well, I need to know more about this and learn it, because I found it a useful, valid tool, and it also helped me understand myself, and it also helped me understand where I was in my life at that point as well. So I sought out a professional astrologer on the Gold Coast, and I was tutored by her, and I got my foundations, and then I just went off and learned it myself, read books and studied it and looked at charts and did my families and my own and just referred to it and absorbed myself into it. And in the beginning of 2019, I sold everything I had and used the money and started reading astrology for people.
Wow. And you mentioned a few times in that explanation the term ruling planet. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so each planet resonates with a particular zodiac sign. Some planets resonate with more than one zodiac sign.
And zodiac is the sun, right? Something to do with the sun?
No, the zodiac is the 12 signs of the zodiac. So you're a Capricorn with Leo rising. Okay,
Right.
so those are, when I say zodiac, I mean the star sign.
Okay.
So those are based on fixed stars within the sky, and the zodiac doesn't move, right? It's fixed. They're called the fixed constellations. So, and then the planetary bodies, which is like the moon and sun, we call them in astrology either luminaries, or you can refer to them as planets, because they're significant points that influence us energetically. And then you have Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which would make up the 10 sort of common planets in astrology. So each one of those planets has rulership over a particular part of the sky, because it's said that the function of that planet expresses best in that area of the sky. So that's given rulership. So for the sun, the part of the zodiac that it rules is Leo, right? And the sun is about self-expressiveness, and Leo is like the pride of the lion, right? It's like energy of that lion. So it's all about your will's self-expression, generosity, kindness. It's like shining your light for the betterment of others, just like the sun in the sky does. It doesn't shine its light for any other reason to bring life on here on Earth. So when I say ruling planet, I'm just saying that particular planets rule particular signs. And before I was saying about Pisces, right, we're in the age of Pisces, and the ruling planet is Jupiter. It has a modern ruler, Neptune, as well, but traditionally, the planet Jupiter rules Pisces. It also rules Sagittarius. But here's the other thing: these signs come in pairs because there's an opposition, right? There's a circle, right? So on one side, if you're just looking at one side, then you immediately look to the other side. Now, opposite Pisces is Virgo, and the symbol of Virgo is the Virgin. So not only do we have Jupiter, Jesus ruling Pisces, and he's like the messenger of our age, right? But where did Jesus come from? Well, wasn't it Joseph and Mary? So then you have another jar word, which is any jar, Jew, jar, any like word like that is depicting Jupiter. Okay, so there's Jupiter in Pisces, as in Joseph, and then we have who? The Virgin Mary, which is opposite. And it was the Immaculate Conception, right, that creates Jesus. So when you think of it in terms like that, you're like, oh, that's a coincidence. That's weird. And when you layer coincidence upon coincidence upon coincidence, and over and over and over and over and over, to the point where you're like, it can't be a coincidence. It can no longer be a coincidence. And that's the thing too. Like in Western culture, we have terms like coincidence, which almost enables our consciousness to forget the connection because we've been, oh, that's just a coincidence. It enables us to dismiss the connection because we've used that word. Another way to describe it, it's synchronistic. In other words, there's a relationship between those things. And when you look at that relationship, you're like, wow, there's a definite relationship. And when you see this repeated over and over again, it leaves you no other place to say, well, there has to be something more to this. When you step more into a spiritual way of life, you realize that life can unfold synchronistically. Chance meetings, coincidences, synchronicities. Look at the clock, it's 11:11. These types of things that go on and on. And the reason for that is we have this ego brain, this left brain, this analytical, rational, reasoning, logical brain that needs to work things out and have it all scientific and mathematical, right? And the spirit realm or intuition or higher self or how that manifests, it does so from the right side of the brain, which deals in symbols. And it can't communicate language to us, so it does it in symbols, right? And it's the connection of these symbols that sort of manifest in our life as like when you learn the symbols, you see a different reality, and that ultimately, like all those secret societies I was talking about before, they all learn symbolic language. They don't speak, they don't communicate with rational, logical reason. They communicate in symbols.
Wow, how fascinating.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah, you mentioned weed before. I think anyone listening to this is going to have to smoke some weed to try and fully understand all of what you just said. It's like such a different language, like, because you talk about it so simply. In your head, it makes absolutely perfect sense. Whereas I feel like, I mean, you've done the years of knowledge and sort of reading and learning and stuff. Whereas I'm sort of listening to you going, I hadn't even considered any of this or anything to do with the planet. I can't remember the last time I thought about a planet, do you know, since I was like at school, or maybe when Pluto got declassified as a planet, that kind of thing.
Even that, this is where we are. This is where we live. These things are here above us. They've always been there, always going to be there. But yet we know nothing about them. Even that, you got to question, like, why is that? Why haven't we been... Why aren't they playing a more like role in our life? Oh, it's because we're distracted with material consumer existence. Here, watch some football, watch some reality TV. Here, have some more of this, right? It's to distract us from the nature of reality. But even that, like you said, like I'd never really considered, and I hadn't either until that point of life where I started to. But like en masse, collectively, we are not. These things are obscured from us for a reason.
I think for me, it's almost that thing of if I think too much about space and the planets and stuff, you realize how small and insignificant I am, and me worrying about my diet or where I'm gonna be in 5 years' time is just completely irrelevant. And I think I would never get out of bed if I thought about any of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, overwhelmed you.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the significance of star signs because it's, again, something I find really interesting that you can tell a lot from a person about with their star signs and sort of almost tell them elements of their life and what's going to happen. But the thing is, I looked on various websites and I don't know if you're going to tell me that the websites are fake or not correct, but a lot of them I looked at, there were really bizarre things because I'm a Capricorn and there were just really weird things they were telling me about, I was looking at one today, and this was advice for someone to do to me as a Capricorn, right? It said, Capricorns love to be touched. So run your fingers up your partner's leg or kiss them when your partner's legs are over your shoulders. Now, legs over my partner's shoulders suggest a common pastime I have is sitting on my partner's shoulders, which I don't do because I'm not 4 years old or a topless woman at a festival. So what is it that means?
Fuck me, I don't know. Capricorns like to be touched. uh, But I guess the way that they probably come to that understanding is Capricorn is a cardinal earth sign and earth rules over the body. So then they might have taken that as to mean literally like, oh, you're an earth sign. Maybe you like to be touched. But I know a lot of Capricorns, and I'm not sure that that's something that I would put as a stereotype for them. Maybe Taurian, right, would be more, because Taurus is all about the senses, experiencing life from a sensual point of view. Taurus is about like feeling, touching, tasting, right? If that interpretation was coming from someone saying that was more Taurian, the touch and the leg thing and all of that, I mean, that's just some fucking weirdo written that.
Right.
But the touch it would be more associated. Yes, the earth sign signifies so, and that's the other thing too. Like, you break these signs to their elements, because that's ultimately what it is, where it's an expression of an element, and earth is physical material, right? So I guess that's where they've pulled that interpretation from, but it would be more suited to a Taurian, the touch part and the sensuality part of it, And sensuality is not sexual, it's sensual. It's in other words, it's the activation of senses, all of them, not just touch. But I don't know, do you like to be touched?
No. And even if I did, I certainly wouldn't disclose any sort of that information on this podcast. I just met you.
Yeah, no, what I mean, like, I mean, just in general, you're one of those people that like, oh man, God, touch me, I want you to touch me.
I mean, not anymore, not in this post-COVID world, but I'm part of the problem in your eyes.
Not in mine, not at all.
I also, whilst I was doing the horoscope reading and stuff, I decided to read some of the other star signs horoscopes just out of interest, and I found that I actually connected a lot with a different star sign. Now, some would argue that the star sign interpretations are written in a vague fashion to try and appeal to most people, to try and sort of draw you in. What would you say to sort of counter that?
No, because like a Virgo person, you can't describe a Virgo person based on like a Cancerian type person. Like, it's just, they're fundamentally different. And if I tried to, the Virgo person is like, that's not me. I'm not like that.
Right.
Here's the thing. When you're looking at a star sign, you're looking at the sun's expression in your life, okay? And the sun has particular types of expressions that are very fixed. It deals with self-expression and the expression of your will. All those things like self-belief, self-confidence, they all are depicted by the sun in someone's chart. And the sun also represents vitality. Now, you're a Leo rising, but you're Capricorn sun. So when people meet you and they see you or meet you for the first time, they don't meet Capricorn. They don't see Capricorn energy, because that's not what you project. You project your rising sign. So when you meet someone, you're meeting them at their rising sign. Occasionally, you'll meet someone that has their rising sign and their sun sign, which are the same. Okay, so they're born right around dawn as the sun's rising. You find those people have a sun and rising sign that are the same. And then those people you see is like, what you see is what you get. In other words, you meet them and they're a certain way. And when you get to know them, they don't change. They're the same person. Whereas you meet them, you meet the Leo. You meet that sort of expressive person, like generous, kind, sort of warm, open person. And then you get to know you on a deeper level, and how you view yourself, your self-image, is your sun's expression. So, by just looking only at a sun, that's how come the horoscopes in the magazines are so hit and miss, because your sun is only one little part of your makeup. It's how you view yourself. I like to say to people, the rising sign is what people see when they meet you. The sun is what you think, is how you think about yourself. Like, I think about when I say I am, then you're talking about your sun. But when I meet you, I'm not seeing that. Unless I get to know you on a deeper level, then you're going to express more of that sun energy. So just looking at one sign or their sun sign is very vague. There are traditionally, right, there are at least 10 planets that are significant. Let's say another couple, maybe you could say 11 or 12 planets There are 12 zodiac signs, there are 12 houses, and then there's the relationship between those planets which make up the composition of a person. It's complicated. And to just stereotype us and to say, well, they're all the same, it's like, well, that hasn't taken into consideration for you. You have Mercury, Sun, Neptune conjunction in the sixth house. Your sun is going to express differently to someone with Sun, Saturn conjunction in the 10th house. Much, much differently, way differently, right? So when you're just using one element of astrology, it's sort of like really simplifying it to a very basic term. But I guess you could agree that we're complex beings, right? We've got nuances and differences and tastes and characteristics and strengths and weaknesses, and the way we express ourselves changes depending on what area of life we're operating within. And all of that can be depicted by a whole astrological natal chart, not just their star sign.
Wow. Well, that I should probably explain to people listening as well that Luke has very kindly actually read my star chart. We've done that prior to this recording. So you've actually gone through and looked, and you know quite a lot about me because of based on my stars. That's why you've got all that sort of knowledge. It's really interesting that you sort of know all of that about me, like that I don't show my Capricorn, I show my rising. What was it? You said project rising sign? Is
Yeah,
that what you said? What does that mean?
you're Leo rising. And
What does the rising bit mean?
okay, so when you were born, and the way astrology works, and the reason we need a birth time is because we take the belief that when you take your first breath in this body is the moment where the conjunction of spirit or soul and body happen. It's like, now you're here, you've arrived. This is the moment. So it's the birth moment, right? So it's important for those that are listening and want to get an accurate astrological reading. We need an accurate birth time. So we can talk about that later if you like. But imagine at the moment that you came into this earth plane and took your first breath, if you were to look due east to the eastern horizon at the time of birth, there would be a zodiac sign that would be cresting the horizon on the eastern plane, right? And why the east? Because that's the direction the sun rises from, and that's the direction of like the spirit, right? And the rising sign is the junction between the earth, literally the earth, and the sky. And think of the earth as body and the sky as spirit. And that's the moment that they meet, right? So that tells a lot about the person, how they came into the world, but also the way they express themselves. So what do they project to the world? And that would be called like a persona, right? So a persona is like the image that you present. It's not who you are, it's just an image I present. Right? So when you're looking at the rising sign, the zodiac sign that's there, plus the ruling planet and whatever aspects are being made to that area of the chart, tell you a lot about how that person expresses themselves and what you see when you meet them. It also tells you a lot about how they initiate anything new in their life. What sort of energy do you go into new ventures with? For you, with Leo, it's confidence, right? Because it's like Leo energy. So you enter into new like experiences in life, like with a sense of confidence, right? A sense of self and like expressing that. So that's the rising sign. It's different than the sun sign. The sun is just the sun, obviously, what zodiac sign it was in. The sun rules over your sense of self, right? And they say that you were born as your rising sign and you become your sun sign through life's experiences. And if you think about this, if your version of who you are is different to what it was when you were a kid, right? And you go through this, and as you grow in life's experiences, you become more of yourself, right? You're sort of becoming, aren't you? Through life's experiences. Like you haven't yet been through your Saturn return, so you're yet to really reach full maturity. Right. And you'll actually find that once you get into your 30s, and actually a point that I looked into your chart, which if ever there was an astrological alignment that depicted spiritual awakening, then I saw that in your chart. And I think the 25th of August, 2025, you must contact me and we'll talk.
Are you serious? Wait, what? Hang on. What the hell? What the fuck is going to happen?
No, a spiritual awakening. Like
A spiritual awakening.
I mean, if there were in someone's chart for something like significant to that happen, I'm like, wow. If you've not yet spiritually awoken, like that's a spiritually awakening time, like that influence that's happening to your chart at that time. So I just thought I'd drop that for you, so that which is not a negative influence. It's a very positive one. It's an awakening one, and it happens shortly after your Saturn return, which is a period of coming of age between 28 and 30 that everyone goes through.
I was going to say, is this something that's going to be unique to me?
Yes, well. Look, I think humanity is going to go through a pretty decent spiritual awakening in 2024, 25. But for you in particular, yeah, it's going to be profound, very profound.
I have to put that in my calendar.
Yeah.
I'm just going to put a little note saying profound today.
You know, it's funny that date I gave you, and it was just weird how that was the date that I was like wondering when these alignments actually activated in your chart. So I was looking ahead in future because I saw it and I was like, I wonder if that happens at the same time as this other astrological alignment, which I know of because I've studied it. And I'm like, holy cow! And guess what date it was? The 25th of August, 2025. It's the fucking day of my birthday.
Are you kidding me?
No. So I was just like, wow. Like that's, so obviously we'll have to keep in contact and
Yeah,
you have to tell me
for
what's going on
sure.
in your life at that point in time.
I mean, to be honest, normally, well, back when I was a stand-up comedian and had a job before COVID,
Mm.
August is the Edinburgh Festival, and normally around the 25th is when you finish. So I imagine my spirit awakening is gonna be, I'm so broken, I'm just gonna give up comedy and just work in a supermarket or something.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can think of.
Funny.
But wow, so your birthday is 25th of August.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
So does that mean somehow we're connected? Was this podcast meant to happen?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, when you move into a spiritual way of life, like there is no chance. Like everything's supposed to happen when it's supposed to happen. You trust in the universe, and you have this new wonder at the way the world unfolds. And it's just, it is. We live in a magical realm. Really, there is magic everywhere all the time. It's just that when we're in our left ego brain, we can't see it, and we will never see it from that perspective. We have to awaken our intuition and our right brain and our symbolic language, and we have to connect to that whole and become whole. The reality that the mainstream collective matrix is trying to keep us in is the left brain paradigm. In that, though, in the left brain, the ego has elevated itself to what it believes is God's status. So it thinks it fucking knows everything, and it's the be all and end all. But if you look at any legitimate spiritual practice, it's all about the disillusion of the ego mind to connect to who you really are. Because the ego mind is that identity that you think you are, and then you realize, oh, I'm not that either.
Yeah, wow. How fascinating. Honestly, this is so interesting. And I think even if you don't believe in this stuff, a bit the same when I was interviewing David the Medium, you can't help but wonder. Like, I find it so interesting. You are so confident you know all this stuff about me. And I'm really interested to hear what you say about my star, what would you call it, star chart at the end of this. And I guess going back to the thing I was saying about being able to identify with other star signs and stuff, the reason I brought that up was under the section, there was a category under my star sign where it said, what makes Capricorns happy? And it said they thrive from praise because they really value how others see them. Now, surely that's everyone, isn't it? Like, I'm not going to look up Aries and it says Aries love when people think they're a prick. So what is it like?
Mm-hmm.
Are there different elements that can overlap with different star signs? And by the way, if you don't start this bit by saying that was a very good question, I'm going to be extremely offended.
Well, I don't need to say it now because you said it. Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's again, when you're just looking at things like that, it's really easy to just be skeptical and dismiss things like that because they're very generic. They're just, well, you can say that about anyone, and that's the challenge with a lot of people, is that they go to that level, is like that level of understanding. And to bring this back, what we were speaking about before, up until recently, unless you're looking outside of the mainstream culture, what we've had in mainstream culture when it comes to astrology is the horoscope in the magazine and the newspaper, and that's basically looking at one very tiny element of someone's makeup and then making a statement about those people born at that time that's generic for all those people born at that time, and it's just not that way. Again, it's by design, I think, to lead people away from it, to go, whatever, that's just crap. But when you start to break apart someone's chart and their makeup astrological and start to give them guidance based on what you see in their chart, it's pretty specific information that becomes quite valuable and useful. So yeah, the Capricorn wanting praise, right? So Capricorn is the sign of ambition. right? But it's also a very practical sign. But its ruling planet is Saturn, and Saturn can be very pessimistic too. So, when I looked at your chart, I was like, okay, well, this is someone like you. You've got what's your podcast called? The Anti-Skeptic?
Anti-skeptic, yeah.
Skeptic. And it's like, I looked at all that Capricorn energy and I'm like, there's skepticism there, right? Because it's that distrust. It's like, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
Bullshit, right? And also too, coming from a very practical perspective, like what's the use of this? Like, is this useful? And then if it's not, like, I don't want to waste my time with something that's not practical or useful. So yeah, I was like, that's an interesting little tidbit.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so with all this in mind, do you yourself read like a daily horoscope, or do you
No.
you don't? Okay.
No, so I look at where things are. So at the moment, like I think we spoke off air about Mercury retrograde. So I'm looking at that type of thing, like what's happening, where are the cycles of these planetary bodies, what's coming up as far as full moons and new moons, what's coming up as big outer planetary alignments that can really create a lot of change and shift for us. So I look at those things, and then all I'm doing when I read someone's chart is I'm bringing that information into how that impacts them as a person. Because, for example, this year, the Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto conjunction in Capricorn at the beginning of this year, I look at that and go, well, that's the energy that's responsible for this, whatever we call it, pandemic, right? There's a lot of words I'd like to use rather than that, though. But then where that energy is in someone's chart is going to be different. So that means that where COVID affects you is going to be different to where it affected me. Now, for me, like for you, and I know all COVID's in your 6th house, so work, bang, like you got a problem with work. Like this is the area of your life where it's been impacted. And you were saying before COVID, you're a comedian, and now like that you can't do that, or you haven't been able to do that. And it's like, well, the area of life that influence happened for you is in the 6th house, and the 6th house is work. I would also ask too, like, what's your health like? Have you had any health issues? And not only recently, but you've had Pluto in Capricorn in the 6th house now since 2008. So I'm wondering if you've had any sort of health crises as well that you've had to go through or work through. And we can talk a bit more about that too at the end. But for me, COVID's been an amazing growth year for my business and what I do. So even though the outer world crisis is going on, how that impacted my life based on my astrology was, this is actually an empowering time to grow my business and grow what I do and get more exposure and, have more clients and have more people come to this type of practice.
So when you say that you look at the alignments and stuff where everything is, do you determine sort of what your mood or how your day is going to be every day based on where the stars and the planets are that day?
No, I do not micromanage my life. I use astrology for myself if I'm challenged with something in my life. I use it probably 4 or 5 times majorly throughout the year, definitely at the end of a year and start of a year, to sort of look ahead, to sort of go, okay, this is the area of life where this influence is happening. So what am I going to do about that? Am I going to, work through that? Am I going to work with that? Or actually, this could be a challenge. How am I going to approach this challenge? I don't daily manage myself when it comes to astrology. I think that is just taking things to a point where all of a sudden, I better not, is it good time to ring my friend? I better look up, no, not yet. Actually, wait another minute. Now is, you know what I mean? Like you can just inhibit life's beautiful, magical experience by doing that. So I don't use astrology to micromanage my life. Even like lunations, we have a new moon and a full moon every month. Some are like really powerful and important that I will sort of track and look at. And others I'm like, it's just another full moon. Like it's no big deal. We have a really big one tomorrow, I believe.
Is that a full moon?
Yeah, we have a really big one.
So this is another thing. Because why do people act more crazy on a full moon? Because I have to say, I've never seen a full moon affect people's moods, except that time my dad pulled his pants down at a Christmas party. But how does it? What is it that the moon has such a control? Like you said, you mentioned at the beginning about controlling the waves and stuff. But what is it that makes? Because I remember getting my hair cut a few years ago, and I'd never heard about it. But people were running down the street and just being crazy. And he went, "Oh, well, it's a full moon apparently tonight, so yeah, people getting ready early." And I was like, I thought he was joking. And then I've spoke to people about it since, and they're like, no, full moon. And even when I turn up to gigs, sometimes you'll hear other people go, the crowd are fucking mad tonight, and someone will pipe up and go, it's a full moon. Like it's like Like that is a legit
Mm.
reason. So what is your explanation for that?
Yeah, and if you ask people that work in emergency rooms in hospitals, their full moon, they're way busy. They've just got people doing crazy things, and they're in there with all sorts of crazy shit. And it's a time that they actually, my elder sister's a 25-year nurse in a hospital on the Gold Coast, and she was, from the time that she was in ER and things like that. It's like they plan around like an influx of customers for the full moon. So because they know they're going to have people doing silly things. Now, why is that? Well, what influences do the sun and the moon have on us? The sun, right, being the light of the day, wherever the light touches, we're aware of what it's touching. So we're conscious of it. So the sun represents consciousness. So we're consciousness, in other words, light, right? If you're unaware and in the dark, you can't see, then it's unconscious. And the moon, right, because it's the ruling body of the nighttime, and it has no light of its own that it emits, it only reflects the light of the sun, right? So the moon in astrology represents our subconscious, or our reactions to things that arise from the darkness. They arise from either our instinctual patterns of behavior, the way in which we were raised, the instincts that we had, type of life we had. Our mother plays a really big role in the way we respond to our reality, especially our early formative years, and what type of mother we have. But all of that mother energy and lunar energy and subconscious energy is all represented by the moon in astrology. So what happens is we have a new moon, and the moon is being seeded with what they call the solar seed of consciousness at the time of the new moon. And as the moon then moves towards full, when the moon is full, it's receiving now the full light of the sun. So if the moon is subconscious, the sun is consciousness, the sun highlights or brings awareness to things that the moon has, like, in its subconscious. It brings that to light, like it reveals it. So what tends to happen is it's an influx of energy, and it comes from a place where we're unaware of it, right? From the subconscious to consciousness. So it's like, oh, wow, there's something you wanted to be revealed, or some sort of shift consciously. It generally happens around the full moon. Now, if you bring this into people's experiences, their emotions are bringing, like, because the moon has some influence over the emotions as well, and they're getting like an emotional charge, and people aren't necessarily conscious of it, but it does affect their mood, and it makes them a little bit like have an influx of emotional energy. And often that emotional energy is like played out in doing things they normally wouldn't do.
The terminology and the stuff that you talk about is quite specific, I would say, linguistically to an astrologer. I took the time to write down something you said,
Yeah.
and sort of bear with me. So this is what you said. This is on an Instagram live, basically explaining where we were at the moment when you're doing that Instagram live. You said, we're right in the moment of a new moon. The moon is conjunct with the sun. Every month, when that happens, the sun and the moon share the same zodiac degree. We have a new moon, a new beginning. This new moon is a 4 degree of Aries, squaring the lunar nodules. This new moon is conjunct with the asteroid Chiron. Chiron represents wounds and healing, and in Chiron, when it's in Aries, it's our wounds and our healings and about being able to express ourselves. Isn't it interesting that in this new moon, our ability to express ourselves is going less and less and less? And Mercury is in its shadow period and moving through Pisces. Now, in the politest possible way, what the hell are you talking about? Because it was just so much in one go. What is that tiny segment? What are you explaining? What is happening in the universe in that little microcosm example that I just gave there?
Yeah. So that seed point for that month coming ahead was going to be the theme around our expressiveness and how we express ourselves. And the Mercury part is the mind and the intellect and the communication style, right? So it's like allowing people to know that where we are at the moment, it's like this part of our cycle is going to bring up some wounds around our ability to express ourselves. And then what happens is in our life, we actually have a period where we're being like unable to express ourselves. So when in our reality, we are no longer able to express ourselves, we're locked down wearing a mask, right? What can that do symbolically? What that can trigger is times in your life where, because of Chiron's influence, which is activating a wound or needing healing, it can activate a time in your life where you felt like you couldn't speak up or you couldn't speak out. It's like I've had this wound around that, my self-expressiveness. Now, when I do those lives and I talk on that, I'm talking about the influence of the planets above us, but it's going to influence individuals in a different way. And what I tend to find is those that is specific for, because it's really prominent in their chart, they like, oh my God, that's exactly what's going on in my life. That's exactly how I feel. And it's not everyone, it's never going to be everyone, because that influence, right? When I marry that influence to your chart, it's going to be in a specific part, and it may be in a part of your chart that doesn't influence your chart in a prominent way. Likewise, though, there might be something that does, like I spoke to you before about your awakening in 2025. That's very specific to you, but there may be other people at that time that are just like, oh, Kelsey had an awakening. What's that about? So even though that's happening here and we all share that, think of it like this. Your astrological natal chart is like a set of invisible energetic antennas that pick up the cosmic motions of life unfoldment, right? And your specific energetic antennas are unique to you. No one else has your antennas in the layout that you do. So therefore, what you receive, right, from the universe is going to activate you in a specific way, but someone else, it's going to activate them in a specific way. Sometimes what's happening in the sky above is not aligning with any of your radars whatsoever. So you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't feel anything. But then there are other times when you have some sort of crisis or accident or emotional sort of challenge that you've had to work through. And it's like, well, yeah, okay, yeah, that I can understand. But if you looked at it from an astrological perspective, you could be like, oh, well, this is the influence that you were under at that time.
And so does that mean that you, like, if you were to look at my star chart or someone else's or your own or just where everything is at the moment, can you, by the stars and the planets, look for guidance for them? Do you blame them if negative things happen in your life? Or can you see that something happens and you go, oh, well, of course that happened. Neptune was out of sync with Saturn.
Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily blame them, but I help bring a little bit of understanding, and then help. The good part about it is help them understand how they're moving through whatever experience they're having. So help them understand what that is represented. Like the planetary alignments are activating that part of their life, but how do I understand that? What's this about? So that's where a good astrologer comes in, is like to give them the tools and able to go through challenging times, because in life there are life's ups and downs, and but then there are some times where there are key points in our life where things are happening where we're like, I don't know why I'm stuck. Predominantly a lot of the people that come for sessions with me are women, and probably definitely the number one theme is like, I either want a relationship, I either want out of a relationship, or like it's all around like love and relationship themes. So helping them understand the types of patterns that are playing out when it comes to them and other people in their life and relationships. And then sometimes too, you can bring that to experience they've had in their upbringing, which is evident in their chart. And then you can sort of help to say, well, see, this is how you're approaching this area of life at the moment. It's because of these influences or experiences that you had, and now it's a pattern that's been embedded and you're replaying it just in a different form, and this is how it's creating challenges when it comes to relating. And you help them, and it's very specific to them because it's based on certain astrological alignments within their chart. Likewise too, some people come to me and they're like, I had a lady today and she wanted to know, she had two options when it came to what she wants to do, and she was really stuck on like, I don't know, I really like both options and I don't know what to do and I need some guidance. And it was really clear in her chart of what option was going to align for her, and then also too how to take that other option that she had to incorporate it just in her lifestyle rather than work or purpose or what I'm doing here. So just like that, someone's like earnestly going, you know what, I'm confused here at this point. I don't know what I want to do. I really like this, but I don't know if I can do it. And then I really like this. I'm not sure which one I should do. I can look in their chart and say, well, here is the expression of this, and this is where your chart, this is how your chart sort of expresses. So, and then it's not telling them this is what you must do, because I don't advise people on that. Like, you got to do this or do that. But if they ask, I'm going to offer advice on things and techniques and tools, but also I'm just going to say, well, this is what's playing out here, and then give them the awareness for that. And then with awareness, that's the biggest thing. It's like, oh, now I'm aware of that's a pattern. Yeah, right. That makes so much sense. And then I have the option to overcome the pattern, the dysfunction, the challenge, or I can continue in the same place and make the same mistake and learn the hard way.
Now, you touched on the issue of like love and relationships, and I feel like that's a big reason why people look into star signs and horoscopes and stuff like that. Are there some star signs that will absolutely never go together and never work out? I could practically hear my girlfriend. She's going to listen back to this and go, "Are you looking for an excuse to leave me?" Are there? Are there? Can you absolutely say if a new relationship is starting, going, "Oh, this is not going to work out"?
You can look and go, yeah, that's going to be challenging for sure. And there are certain combinations that are very challenging. Having said that, that you're only again just interpreting sun signs, and that's just very, generic and non-specific, and it's more than just a sun sign. So in a chart, you're looking at the sun's compatibility, but you're also looking at the seventh house. You're also looking at their Venus. Then you're bringing in asteroids like Juno and things like that. So there are lots of different things that you can help. So some challenging relationship patterns are when you're with a person who's the sign opposite you, because they're diametrically opposed, right? However, that can bring a lot of balance for two people and can really work long term, but it's not without its challenges. And then there are certain relationships between some of the zodiac signs where I'm like, that's a really challenging relationship. And you find when people are in those relationships, it's a lesson they're learning. And when they learn the lesson, sometimes the relationship ends. Sometimes they transform their relationship and take it to a different level. But certainly, so some of the ones which I find, Virgo and Aries are very challenging. Taurus and Aquarius are challenging.
And for what reason?
Because the elements don't combine well together. So the elements have harmony. So water and earth go together, and fire and air go together. Now, this is easily depicted because if we look at a fire, if you want to start a fire, what do you got to do? You got to blow on it, right? And if there's no oxygen, there's no fire. So one of the key ingredients for fire is air. They're very compatible. So air and fire signs work really well together. Likewise, the earth supports water. The earth allows water to flow, right? Look at a river, right? That's just the water flowing through the earth. So earth and water are very compatible as well. That's not to say that a combination of those like earth and air can't work, but like let's look at this: air and water. What happens when you've got a body of water and you blow on it? It makes waves. So the challenge for those people is there's going to be waves in their relationship. Literally, there's going to be challenges. It's going to be volatile. And if people know that, sometimes though, that type of energy and the way it manifests can create passion, or it can create tension, which leads to passion. And it can be like, wow, like, holy shit, like I'm just like so passionately connected to this person. But then is that compatible for a long-term committed relationship? Knowing the different elements too of yours and your partners can really help be aware of the types of challenges that you're going to face. And if your element is squaring another element, right, then you're coming at life from two different perspectives. And that can be good because they bring a fresh new perspective that you hadn't thought of. But it can be challenging because they always seem to be like coming from the bloody different place. They just can't align, right? So if you're like, okay, well, that's something we can work with. And then as a conscious being, you can decide, well, do I want to continue to live a life of challenge? And is there something more with this particular person? Or no, actually, this challenge is like going to be here. We're going to have to work through this continuously. I don't want to do that. Yeah. I mean, driving relationships ultimately is like when you ask your heart, can you be without them? Would you give them a kidney? Would you die for them? And your heart says like yes to those questions or no, then that's what I say is you can make a challenging astrological alignment work.
I heard you say in one of your videos that Venus is the planet of love and joy, and it's all about likes and loves and relationships. So, if you were to go by that theory and the powers of astrology, should you wait until a time where we move into Venus to start dating? Like, is it as simple as that? And is any time outside of that set period, you would be totally unlucky with love as a result?
No, not necessarily. But there are certain transits to Venus that I'd be like, okay, well, like a Neptune Venus transit can be like you're seeing through rose-colored glasses. You're not really looking clearly at things, and you can be misguided, and you can be swept away by someone that doesn't have your best interests at heart. So I would be advising someone if they've got a Neptune transit to their Venus to make sure that they're basing their motives in reality and not in fantasy, because that would be one of the things that would be happening. Like, oh my God, and they can literally live in this, create a fantasy in their mind. An example of that recently, I had a client and they had a long distance relationship begin, and it was under an influence of Neptune and Venus in a challenging aspect. And I'm like, look, because they were telling me how wonderful this particular person was. And I said, look, the thing about a long distance relationship is you're not physically with them. So your imagination is filling in a lot of the gap between the reality, because that's what you're doing. You're living in a fantasy. And when you're not actually communicating with them, you are actually in thinking about them, but fantasizing. You're using your imagination. So then, therefore, that connection, you've got to be mindful, is it grounded in reality? Turns out it wasn't that long after that she said to me, you know that thing? And I'm like, yeah. She goes, oh, well, I found out he had someone else that he was seeing, and that didn't come through. And I'm like, okay. But at the time that she was adamant, that it was like, oh my God, like this connection that I have. And I'm like, yeah, but you realize that this is the influence. You can be stuck in this realm that's not real. But having said that, sometimes a Venus and Neptune transit can mean you have a really mystical or transcendental spiritual connection with another person. So, just pointing that out for people, and they're like, yeah, actually it is. There is a lot of fantasy involved in this relationship. Or no, oh my God, we just share the same spiritual aspirations. Oh, wow, that's a really good connection of that energy. So it's not like I can come along and say to you, this is happening, you shouldn't do that, and that's what you're going to. I'm going to be like, these are the types of expressions that are, or influences that are happening at the moment. And then you can be like, yeah, okay, that makes sense, and then base your decisions on your actions on that.
And you said previously as well that a lot of your clients tend to be women. And according to my research, that matches up, because it said that 75% of people who read horoscopes or look into astrology are women. Do you have any sort of theories of why that is? Are women more inclined to be spiritual and men are more skeptical and less in touch with their spiritual side?
Yeah, 100%. Men are no good at talking about this type of thing. They're not really in touch with their emotions. And this is a generalization, but it's evident because the vast majority of people, like I do have male clients, and they're just like consciously awakened people that understand the benefit of this type of thing in their life. I have repeat male clients, like some of them, and quite often too, they'll message me like, oh my God, this is happening. What's going on? And I'll let them know. But yeah, I think in general, we're a bit behind in the whole, getting in touch with ourselves. Ultimately, like to be in touch with your femininity as well as your masculinity, and life can mean in some situations you want to express more masculinity, and in situations more femininity. But guys have an issue with expressing femininity, and some women also, but mostly they're in touch with that. But yeah, I just feel like that's probably one of the key things, is that women are open to this, and women are feelers, right? And a lot of astrology is not like concrete, as far as it's more like what's happening on their emotional or their thought realm, or it's like these concepts. So women are way more in touch with that element of reality, rather than men that are really more material driven. Like, I don't know about you, I grew up in an era where don't cry, you're a sissy.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too.
So as men, like if you look at two babies when they're born, that you can't distinguish them between male and female generally. Like, no disrespect, but you look at two brand new babies, just their heads, you wouldn't go, well, that's a boy and that's a girl. Like, we pretty much come out the same apart from our appendages. And then it's our life experiences and how we're treated within our experiences that help develop a part of our masculinity or femininity. But what happens at a really early age is guys are told not to outwardly express emotion. It's seen as a weakness. It's sissy, you're a girl, grow up, don't be and when you get into, so like maybe in kindergarten and early school, you still have that element, but at a certain point you realize as a male, not only is it like not acceptable, but it's a sign of weakness. So you learn to stop doing it. But that's not to say that we don't stop feeling. We just learn how to hide it or overcome it or suppress it. And for me, I feel like it's like men build dams, dam walls up around their emotions. And if we don't have relief valves for those dams, then often with men too, they find crises later in life that are difficult, and the dam wall bursts. And then when it does, they can't function in their reality, their life, their relationship, their job anymore. And that's why I feel it's one of the big significators for the reason why male suicide rates are way higher than women, because we haven't learned to have a healthy expression of emotions, because we bottle it up. It's sad, really. I have 3 children, 3 boys of my own, so I'm cultivating their, emotional vulnerability as well, not letting them see it's a sign of weakness.
Yeah, well, it's extremely progressive of you. And like you said, I grew up with that kind of mentality of be tough, but I do think things are changing. And like you said, with even to the point of gender now, gender fluidity and stuff, I think we're stopping to divide ourselves into these groups. These people act like this, these people act like that. Even though we're talking about stars and star signs, that's saying you do act like this, you do act like that, but they're not specific to gender, race, anything like that, which is super interesting. And while we're on that topic, do you think that everything happens for a reason? That phrase, it was written in the stars. Do you think that everything that happens, good or bad, is kind of your destiny?
Yes, but there's a caveat. And the
Okay.
caveat is don't be a dick. Don't be a dick and then go, oh, well, it's all happening for a reason. I mean, that's just what they call spiritual bypassing.
I like the idea of the constellations going, well, you were going to win the lottery, but you cut up that guy earlier and that weren't cool, man. That was not cool.
Yeah.
Also, earlier today, I put a post on my Instagram asking if anyone had questions for you.
Yeah.
And a lot of people got back, which is nice. Thanks for everyone that did. I've just picked out a couple, and they're both asking pretty much the same question.
Yeah.
And I imagine you kind of got a lot to say about it. That's why I picked it. The first person called Flynn Michelle. She asked, how does he see 2021? And someone with the handle My Path to Light asked, given the chaos of 2020, when in the future astrology charts do we start to see peace, stability, etc.?
2021 financial collapse, 2024, 25 new earth.
Or what do you mean by new earth?
A shift, a collective shift into a new reality, a better way, more spiritual connection, and maybe what they would call an awakening. Now, even though we're in the awakening and it's always happening, and it's not like the awakening has never stopped, it's just gaining momentum. So I think astrologically next year, we have the planet Uranus, which is about revolution, right? The last time Uranus was in Taurus, which is where it's at, was during the Great Depression. So it has a cycle of 84 years that it comes around through the zodiac. So we're back with Uranus in Taurus. Now, this time, though, and Taurus rules over money. And you just see this as the bull on the stock market in the New York Stock Exchange. They have the bull out the front, right? And they call a raging stock market a bull market, right? And then Taurus, which is the zodiac sign, which symbol is the bull, or is what the fixed earth sign that relates to money, possessions, wealth, and value, things of value. So with Uranus in Taurus, we're having a revolution of those things of value. In other words, money is one of those things. And what happens at the beginning of next year and is active throughout 2021 is Saturn, which is the planet of structure and form, right? It squares Uranus in Taurus. And a square is a 90-degree aspect between the two planets. And 90 degrees creates tension, and tension because the two energies are coming from two different places, right? And the tension that's created through a square aspect creates change. So whenever there's a square, something's going to change. You're forced into change. There's no avoiding the change. Now, knowing that where we're at, and even now pulling on my other, research that I do, you've had them talk about the chance at a reset. Have you heard that? I don't know if you've heard that, but
I've not, no.
there's a think tank out of Germany or somewhere like that. A particular guy, I can't think of his name just offhand now, but he's talked about how COVID has presented an opportunity for a global financial reset. And he's sort of like the puppet that speaks the reality that's coming into existence, if you like. It's the way they do it. They program us with these preconceived ideas, like that's what's happening. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves in 2021 with this astrological alignment. I suspect that we're probably going to get either a financial collapse, or, which is already happening, it's already there, or a new monetary system. And I feel that they've probably already got the new monetary system, sort of shadowing this system ready to be implemented, but they need some sort of crisis to blame the collapse on. If they blame the collapse on COVID, which is clearly what's going to happen, the people that are running the show, that are really running the show, they're absolved from responsibility of that, because it's COVID, yeah, there's a crisis. But if I pull that back to Australia, like Australia has a birth chart, it has two birth charts. It has one for when Captain Cook first landed, but it also has the Federation 1901, when Australia became like its own federation. And that's the chart I use because that's the chart that deals with our matrix reality here, our governing reality. And in that chart, we have Saturn and Jupiter conjunct the midheaven, which is the top point of a chart, which relates to a country's direction. Now, the last time that Saturn sat on our midheaven for Australia's chart was during the 90s recession Australia had to have. Paul Keating was in charge, and we went into a recession in the early 90s. And that astrological influence was there. And here we are 30 years later, like cyclical, it's there again. But this time, it's not only there with Saturn, which is like, right, reformation, but Jupiter, which is the expansion of that. So I don't think it's going to be a recession. I think it'll be more of like a depression type influence for us, particularly here in Australia. So I think that's what's coming in 2021. There's a massive conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius at the end of this year on the solstice, which is December 21st. To have a Jupiter and Saturn conjunction, it's not rare, it happens every 20 years. And that is the right type of energy to bring about reforming society. So every 20 years, cyclically, you can look at the reformation of society in general, based and tied to the cycles of Saturn and Jupiter. But this one is significant because we've got the conjunction happening in Jupiter's sign, okay, and it's on the solstice. And for that to happen, that hasn't happened in this era that we're in. So that's a really unique alignment. And in the astrological community, we're sort of pointing to that point as the peak of this cycle that we're in. Now, it's in Aquarius, and Aquarius is fixed air. They use, when I say they, and I'll quickly digress, you have two planets associated with death, that's Saturn and Pluto. Saturn is the Grim Reaper, right? You reap what you sow, and when Saturn comes around, it's time's up, buddy. And he also rules time. Saturn is Father Time, or Kronos. So he's very closely associated with death. And then you have Pluto, which is the god of the underworld, right? So, and the way that Pluto manifests is transformation through crisis, right? It's also the death to rebirth, or the motif of the phoenix, right? And the phoenix is rising from the ashes. So it's like everything's purged and burnt down, and all the impurities are stripped away, and out of that rises the new birth, okay? So both planets really closely aligned with the death cycles and death in general. On September 11, 2001, you had Pluto in Sagittarius, which is ideology and religion. You had Saturn in Gemini, which is the twins, okay? So, and they were in opposition. That's a very, very dynamic and powerful aspect between two planets. It's like they're playing war with each other, right? Pulling at each other. And what did we have? We had the destruction of the twin towers. 19 years later, right? 19 years later, at the beginning of 2020, was a Saturn and Pluto conjunction. So an opposition is when they're 180 degrees apart in the sky. So one's on one side and one's on the other side. They're at war. The conjunction is the combination of those energies. And 19 years after 2001 and 2020, we have the conjunction of Pluto and Jupiter in Capricorn, which is the sign of government. And we get COVID-19. So coincidence? You be the judge. I'm just telling you how it is. So then fast forward to the end of 2020, you've got Jupiter and Jupiter and Saturn conjuncting in Aquarius. I know they do their rituals, right? These big world events that we have seen as crises, like the September 11 crisis. No, it's a ritual, literally. They do these rituals based around astrological alignments. And if I was to bet on a ritual for this alignment on the solstice, and these points, like the equinoxes and solstices, are very powerful points, and they're super duper powerful for the elite or these people in these secret societies. They do a lot of their rituals around these moments of time, right? They're very powerful points. It's in an air sign. Are we going to have an alien invasion? Are we going to have a shutdown of social media? Are we going to have some type of air event, maybe like a solar flash in the sky, or aurora borealis over the whole of the earth, or, perhaps there's visitation from outer planets? I don't know. But if it is, I'm like, well, it's just that's their ritual that they're doing. It's the next stage of their plan to unfold, right? So I think prepare potentially for some type of ritual around that time. Which will lead us into 2021, which I think will bring about anyway from the astrology, a collapse of the financial system. What I think they've been doing in 2020 is putting in the mechanisms of control for 2021, so that if people freak out or revolt or chaotically uprise, They can instantly instigate martial law, lock down the states. They've already got it. They've already planned it. They've already worked through it. They know how to do it. They've got more surveillance now than they've ever had. They've got state borders now. You can't go anywhere. And literally, they've programmed people this year to do exactly as they're told, to cover up their mouth and their face with a mask, to muzzle themselves so they don't speak out, and to stay in your house. And maybe between now and the end of the year, maybe there's a return of COVID. I think definitely in the north, without a doubt. Jupiter and Pluto are about to have their third conjunction this year, so COVID is no by far way is it gone as far as the way that the media and governments portray it. But maybe we head back into some sort of lockdown, and all of a sudden it comes to a point where they're like, "Don't go outside." They don't want you witnessing what's going on. I get really fucking rabbit holey and conspiratorial. Yeah. So, and then 2024 is Saturn and Neptune's conjunction. When Saturn has a conjunction anywhere, it's a reformation. It's like foundationally, it's the planet that relates closely to the Earth realm and structure and form. And when it conjuncts Neptune, Neptune is transcendence, higher self. It's to merge into the sea of consciousness and become one with everything. And I think that could be a real turning point for a spiritual sort of, or a new spiritual way of reality here. Now, even though they try as they might to keep us in this material prison, this mind control matrix system, it's in the conscious awakening is inevitable, and they will not stop. You might have heard it. Nothing's going to stop what's coming. In other words, we're waking up, and when you wake up, you never go back to sleep. You don't wake up and then fall back into sleep. You wake up, and then you wake up more, and then you wake up more, and then you wake up more, and your consciousness expands, and then you start to realize. And when you do that, you naturally draw away from external authority, from needing control, from fear of dying, right? Like I grew up all my life from the age of 7 until 34 with a fear of death until I had my awakening. And now I'm at peace with death. In fact, one of the other things I'm learning at the moment is to take people into their past life experiences through regression work. And you take them through the death of past lives and into that state of being prior to death, prior to life. So it's something that's become pretty profound for me. But they're using it as a tool or a mechanism for control, because people are frightened to death. And when they're frightened to death, they need saving or helping, and they need a government to do that for them. And that's what I think COVID's about.
Wow. So I've got two questions on all of that. First of all, I think this is just what everyone is going to be screaming when they're listening to this. Is there going to be another lockdown for Melbourne or for other parts of Australia and the rest of the world? I mean, I'm from the UK, so I don't know if you can tell me anything that far afield. The second question is regarding the financial collapse. Is it one of those financial collapses where you would say to everyone to take their money out the banks? Because I actually, just from speaking to people here in Australia, the people that I know about 4 or 5 people that are planning or already have taken money out the banks and they're investing in gold. And I was making a joke out of it going, I thought this was going to be one person, but literally 5 people have told me this. And I've gone, Australia's just going to be full of the most richest homeless people, just people without a roof over their head but sitting on blocks of gold. Is there any advice that is that sort of a thing that you think is going to happen, that people are going to lose their money, and are we going to have another lockdown?
Look, the lockdown, I've got to be careful not to project here and project what I'd like to happen, right? The way that they're instigating 2020 is it's a psychological war on the psychology of people to break them. Okay. I don't think they're done. I think that that's going to unfold. So I'm optimistic, but I'm also a realist. And I'm like, I don't think that their programming is finished yet. We're not going back. There's no COVID normal, and we're not going back to a normal. We are going to literally transform our world and reality. I think even the next few, I'm not sure when this is going to air, but even like we're on the 30th of October now, but we've got a full moon on Halloween tomorrow, conjunct Uranus. So expect the unexpected. You've got the US election in a couple of days. Anything's going to happen. I think there's going to be power grid outages, as you've already shown, or someone else actually in the UK, they've already had them in Liverpool apparently. I just think that as soon as we made it to the midpoint of this year, I'm like, okay, well, now is the real sort of show as we move towards December 21st. I hope no, but I have a feeling that we're going to be back into some form of lockdown or restriction. The financial collapse and the advice around that, I'm not great with money. Um, so I don't like giving financial advice, but I would certainly, if you have a lot of money in the bank, I would certainly think about diversifying that into perhaps some crypto and maybe some hard assets like gold or real estate or something like that. I don't have that sort of money. So, I mean, I'm not in a situation where collapse is going to bother me. It might be worthwhile to, and I don't know sure if it's going to be as important here in a smaller population, but certainly big populations like America and that, I'd be saying like store food and water and things like that. But yeah, financially, if you've got a lot of money, I would at least seek some advice around how do I diversify this and protect myself from a collapse or a bank run or, or a devaluation of money as well. Because all of a sudden, if you've got a shitload of money in the bank and then the dollar collapses and now, it's $50 for a loaf of bread. So if you've got it in gold or something else, the value ultimately when there is some type of transition or collapse, it's those things that either retain or increase value. Whereas our money's fiat. You know what that means? It means it's backed by nothing. It's just a promissory note. In other words, it's an agreement to say that's the value of it. Whereas gold is tangible. Real estate, those types of physical assets, doesn't matter. They're always going to maintain a level of value. Whereas money is like backed by the will of the people. And when the will of the people is lost and defeated and it's worthless, then so too is the money. I just hope that it's not going to be that type of collapse.
Well, there you go, listeners. You were warned here first, so make of that what you will. So the final thing is, a few days ago, I sent you details about my birth and the time of birth, where I was born, all that kind of stuff. And you very kindly made up a star chart of mine. And you also very kindly just text me with a note saying, big year next year, mate. And I've been dying to know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So when I said big year next year, anytime Pluto is transiting a major point in our chart, we go through some pretty deep transformation, sometimes challenging, sometimes empowering, sometimes through crisis. And that's why I was asking really early on about like, how's your health and how's it been? And have you had any issues around health and that? Now you do have a Neptune Sun conjunction, and Neptune is disillusion. It does give you spiritual leaning or aspirations, which is good. But it can bring a heightened sensitivity to your vitality. It might make you more sensitive to certain, foods or impurities. And I would be making sure that when it comes to drugs and alcohol and that sort of thing, that you certainly take those with moderation. Now, you could say that about anyone, but certainly with Neptune's influence, it's like you got to be mindful not to avoid or escape. And using those things to do that, because Neptune's influence can, sometimes we don't like the reality that we're in and we want to avoid or escape or get away. And drugs and alcohol are a way to do that, but also so is meditation and spiritual practices, because we can transcend our reality or we can start to bring about a new one. And Pluto is now sitting at 22 degrees. Your Neptune and Sun conjunction is 25, 27. So next year, Pluto is going to massage both those points in your chart. And when Pluto, it's a slow moving planet. It takes 250 years to go through the zodiac. So we never experience Pluto in all areas of life. It's only in certain areas. But you've got Pluto on your sun, and your sun is your identity and sense of self. So over the next year or two, you are going to fully transform your identity and how you think about yourself. And then everything that you've built in your life around your identity is probably going to be challenged in some way, shape, or form or another. So it might put pressure, especially on work, because it's in the sixth house of work. Be mindful of, I would say to you, it's a really good time to make sure that you're in good health, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health. So you've got regular daily practices that you eat cleanly, you drink water, you exercise, you take care of yourself. You might do a little bit of meditation, because you can use that influence of Pluto to really transform that idea of who you are and that sense of self, to empower you and transform your life in that manner. Otherwise, sometimes when we're not dealing well with Pluto might bring about health crisis to shift us out of like a reality that's not really aligned authentically to who we are. So that's happening. You mentioned you're in a relationship. Now, influencing your seventh house, you've got Aquarian energy, you've got Uranus in the seventh house, you've got Mars in the seventh house, you've got Juno in the seventh house. So whether you know it or not, an independence and freedom within the relationship is really important to you. So making sure that you have got that level of freedom in your relationship and that you're not having to conform to your partner's idea of how you're supposed to be or who you're supposed to be. You don't want to be restricted or limited, and you need them to be supportive of your individuality and to be championing that, not necessarily like pulling them down or saying you shouldn't be like that or be more like this. It's like you need that freedom and liberation when it comes to your relationship. You do have Venus in Pisces, which is nice, and it's in the 8th house, which is good for the romantic connection and intimacy, and that you know sort of deeper emotional bond you can have with another. And in Pisces, that Venus in Pisces is exalted, which means it's really powerful, but it can bring in like a really nice spiritual union too with you and another person. Saturn is in your 9th house, and you mentioned you're religious, and Saturn in the 9th house, straight away I'm like, yeah, okay, well, you're pretty fixed religious, and perhaps also too the influence of that has come from your upbringing. But here's the thing about your Saturn in Pisces, right? And it's integral to this awakening that you're going to go through. You're going to break from patterns, I think, when it comes to your religious perspective or views on life. And it's your responsibility, Saturn represents responsibility, to define your own meaning and purpose. And it might not it might be traditional, religion, but I think it's going to be more a version of like your spirituality, not necessarily conforming to like a religious perspective. Like it might be now and it might be the way you were raised, but I think that that's going to shift and change. And especially you got Saturn return happening in a few years' time, and then you've got like that point of awakening, which I mentioned. So that's an influence that's coming. Now, your midheaven, which is career, direction, ambitions, it's ruled by Aries. So, you need to be the leader in what you do. You've also got Mars, the ruling planet, in Aquarius, and that makes you good to be able to just like comedian energy for sure, because you're objective and you can see it and say it how it is, right? And that's a really great aspect to have as a comedian, because that's what makes them fucking funny. They can say the things that people think, but they don't have the courage to say. So that's a nice influence there. Your nodal points, right? So these relate to your karmic sort of lessons that you're learning here, what you're moving away from, and what you're developing as a soul. And those archetypes are Aries and Libra. So you are learning how to be balanced within your relationships. Okay, so the right amount of compromise as a point of assertiveness. So you've probably like to get your way and have it your way and be more dominant, but you've got to learn to see things from other people's side of things. You've got to learn more to be compassionate, empathetic, and considerate, so that you learn the give and take, because that's how you're going to bring balance. Now, that North Node, which is your soul's yearning, so not necessarily what am I here to do in the physical realm, but what did my soul come here to learn? It's learning inner self-worth, right? You've got to cultivate your self-worth from within, not necessarily from getting your self-worth from being on stage, and getting the praise or recognition that comes along with that, being that. It's like, no, I've got to cultivate that. It's my job. It's not. So, because then what can happen is you can do that work and you're not doing it with a hidden motive of needing to be seen or needing to like for people to like recognize or have a public sort of perception. You're sort of learning to let go of that. Now, if you don't, you become dependent on it. And when it's there, you're going to feel good. But when it's not, you're going to feel like down or demotivated. So it's teaching you to say, hang on, when it comes to self-worth and self-love and like all of those self sort of things, it's your job in that 4th house to cultivate that, not necessarily get it from the job that you're doing. Your Leo rising, so you've just got to make sure as well that pride doesn't get in the way, and that your expression of self is warm and generous, and it warm and illuminates others, right? It doesn't put yourself in a situation where it's like, look at me, I'm the center of attention. So you got to make sure driving that is going to be being really clear on what your values are and making sure they're yours and not some other people's values. And when you are expressing life from those set of values, like life's going to work out well for you. You've part of fortune, which is a part of the chart that relates to an area of life where when we're expressing that area of life and that archetype, we have the most ease, right? And again, that's Leo, so it's confidence, but it's warm and charisma. And it's shining your light, but so it warms and illuminates others. It's not sort of saying like, look at me. And like I said, driving that is developing your own set of values. Chiron is a planet of where we have some archetypal wounding, right? Yours is in the 4th house, and we don't have to go into it. But in a session, what I would be doing with the exploration of that is I'd be asking like, what was your home life growing up like? How was it? Did you feel loved and supported in home? Did you have a nice traditional sort of upbringing? Was there challenges in home life when it comes to the balancing of relationships and how that can play out now in your life? as be one of those things that you might be challenged with. What else did I sort of wanted to talk about for you? In a normal session, like this is how a reading would go. It's a conversation we have. We talk about life. We talk about life's experiences. You tell me about things, and I talk about it from an astrological perspective. So it's a bit unusual to just do what I've done, because it's not how I would do it in a setting. It's not like a reading like David would go, oh, this is what I'm receiving, and I'm telling you what Spirit's saying or what your ancestors saying, and here I'm just giving you the information. A chart is like dynamic, and it really is going to be like, what are your life experiences of this? How do you feel in this area of life? What's challenging you here? How do you struggle? Like, what do you struggle? What were your experiences like growing up? Those types of things. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And then, I mean, again, these are just some of the things that I sort of made a note about and thought that were worthy of talking about. And then I was curious because I looked and went, hang on a second. So if I take that, you can't see this and neither can anyone else, but I'm just going to go there so I can describe what I was talking about. So Pluto, so the planet of Uranus, right, is revelation, insight, individuation. And where Uranus is in our chart, we have the ability to free or liberate ourselves and become really individuated. Yours is straddling the 6th, 7th house. So not only in the work that you do, but the relationship setting is where you're going to find your unique expression of Kelsey. Now, when we have an activation of Uranus, we awaken. Right? It's one of the planets of awakening. Around that time I was talking about for you in August 2025, Pluto, the planet of transformation, conjuncts Uranus in your chart. So it's a transformation, like a total transformation of that area of life. And also at the same time is Saturn and Neptune are in conjunction at the 1st degree of Aries, which puts them in what they call a sextile to that same point. So it's like a triple whammy of the Uranus being activated. And because I know it's one of the planets that relates to awakening or a shift of consciousness or a revelation or insight or individuation, in other words, I'm now individuated. Because if you think about it, up until a certain point in our life, we were playing patterns. And those patterns might be based on our upbringing, our experiences as a child, or the way we were raised, or our friends and social circles, the education we received, right? And they condition us. All of that condition us. Uranus, what it does is it breaks the conditioning, because it's like, that's not you, that's not you, that's not you, that's someone else's conditioning. So it wants to break you free from that. Having Pluto on it, it's a once in a lifetime transit. So it's the transformation of this area of life. But then when you've got Saturn and Neptune in conjunction, sextiling it at exactly the same point in time, I'm like, that is rare and powerful. And it's an awakening. It's like a shift major for you. Like wow, total.
Is that in 2025?
Yeah. You may feel the influences of this building, because it might not necessarily be one day where it's like, I was asleep and now I'm awake, but it might be just all of a sudden there's these inner urges driving you in that direction of, like, exploring consciousness and awakening that and doing those things that help you along that pathway. Yeah. So it's pretty profound.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a positive influence. One of the ways you would advise someone for that period of life is flexibility. You got to be open to opportunity and flexible and to things changing. And what's changing is your perception, right? Your awareness is changing, your consciousness is changing. So as that does, it can really ruffle reality for you. We won't talk about personal things because that we're on air, so we can leave them off air if you like. We can talk about some personal things that are in your chart as well. And if you want to, I'm more than happy to do more of an in-depth sort of reading off air.
Yeah, I'd love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no problem, mate. And then
Thanks,
also,
man.
if the listeners have stuck through to this point, and then,
Which is almost a spiritual awakening in itself.
yeah, so if they are still listening and they'd like to get a reading, then you can use the code WINNING with a capital W and get 10% off.
Well, there you go. Anti-Skeptic exclusive there. Thank you so much for going so in depth and explaining what all this is about, life and what you do and your beliefs. I mean, we went down some avenues I did not expect in this podcast.
Me neither.
But thank you so much for being so open and so clear with what you think and sort of not holding back. And you're also on Instagram as well. We should mention that, where you do your sort of lives. Do you want to sort of plug your Instagram?
Yeah, so it's just my name, Luke Belke, and I put all sorts of interesting things on there that inspire me and inspire others, but also I do regular lives and updates from from my perspective. And like you stated before in this interview, like, tattoos, bald head, I don't fit this love and light stereotype of let's collect a whole lot of crystals and all of that sort of, which is fine. I do have crystals. I don't use them the way that a lot of people do. That's the thing. Like, I was a pest controller for 20 years, and now I have a life that I created, which sees me out of the rat race. I'm no longer 9 to 5. I can pick when I work. I'm comfortably taken care of financially. I love what I do. I'm passionate about it. I love connecting with people and helping them and guiding them and bringing awareness and helping them transition through sometimes some challenging shit going on in their lives. And, there's nowhere to turn in reality a lot of the time when you're going through shit. And, like, you got to see a psychologist, and some people don't like doing that. So I'm proof that you can do whatever it is that you want to do. If you're passionate about it, you pursue that and forget the stereotypes and forget what people says. And you're always going to have the naysayers. And I tell them all the time on my page, if you don't like what I say, fuck right off. Like, nothing is binding you to my Instagram, to my story. Swipe along or defollow. Like, it's no big deal. I'm not going to be offended at all. So yeah, I'm living proof that you can do what it is that you want to do. You'd be surprised at what type of life you can create when you step out of that matrix, that conditioning, that system.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I urge everyone to go give you a follow, look at your live streams and stuff, and book a session with you. And as far as you and I imagine we should regroup in 5 years' time to work out whatever the hell is going to happen. Was it 25th of August, 2025?
Yeah, man. Yeah. So, no doubt we'll talk, between now and then.
Of course. Yeah. It'd be weird if it's just in 5 years' time. I've lost my house.
I will say, though, the spiritual awakening can have profound effect on material reality. And I went from a very successful business and a life to nothing, pretty much nothing. And now I'm building back into a sustainable, comfortable, free, liberated life where I do what I want to do when I want to do it. And but there was a period there that was, the transition was challenging because I was no longer motivated by material desires, Therefore, I banished a lot of that from my life and ended up in a place of like, wow, I got nothing. So it can have pretty profound effects on your life. Yeah. But if that does happen, and I tell people this, like, you got to trust in that process, because what will come eventually is something that's aligned to who you really are, not the person that you were being because of the way you were raised.
Well, what a nice positive note to end on. Thank you so much for joining me today, Luke.
Most welcome. Thanks for having me, mate.
So that was Luke Belke. Well, I think we can all look forward to part 3 of this podcast coming out in 2025, where we find out what the heck happens to me on the 25th of August. So I think it's fitting to end this show with a to be continued. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. Remember to subscribe to this podcast on your favourite podcast player. That way, you'll never miss an episode as soon as it comes out. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram to get first notice of future guests and the chance to send in your questions before the next recording. Just search for Kelsey De Almeida on those sites. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you can do that by becoming a Patreon member by going to patreon.com/anti-skeptic, where you can send me a monthly donation to help support the show. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.